Thank you for coming out and being with us today on this tour. We're going to spend some time with you today showing you what the results were when Brad and I went out to 27 different sites earlier this spring. We're then going to share with you what the state board is doing with that data and how they're wrestling with that data. And maybe the most important part of today is to get your feedback so that we can take that back to them and share how to massage this, or maybe how to look in a different direction, or how, yes, you're on the right path to go as we move forward. I'm going to put a plug in several times today for an event that's going to take place on October 27th here in Wichita. The Hyatt Regency is the KSDE Annual Conference. Nothing new about that. We do that annually. That's the annual conference. What's new about it is if you sign up to attend this year, not only great breakout sessions and things that are going on in Kansas, you're going to get to hear the National Teacher of the Year early in the morning of the 27th. And then just after that presentation, the State Board of Education and other members of the communities of Kansas, educators and other people, are going to unveil the new vision for education moving forward. And so we hope you all can be there because you're a part of developing that. This is not just lip service, something we're checking off, so you're a part of that. But as I mentioned, we went out to over 20 different sites and community, and then we also did some Chamber of Commerce tours. And Brad Nunswander loved the fact when he found something out. Brad?
Probably the most important nugget from our tour, it was like out of 20 locations, it was like number 16. We were in Coffeyville and I ran into Randy's best friend from high school. I've been trying to find out what Randy's CB handle call sign was back in the 70s, and guess what it was? Mr. Fantastic. Randy's like, I can't believe you ran into my best friend from high school, and he actually told you that.
He's no longer my best friend. That's the moral of that story. So Tim Ferriss, you hear that? That's how I discard friends. Tim and I are fraternity brothers from college. So we didn't know what to call this. You know, we've been out, we gathered this data. Kansas State University and our research people have been compiling it and trying to make some sense out of it relative to what national and state data is looking at. Largest qualitative study that Kansas State University has ever done. It may be the largest in the history of Kansas, certainly the largest they've done. So we're just simply calling this the reunion tour. You know, we have our party bus. You see Jim McNeese, State Board Chair. He's driving the bus. We've got all the State Board members on it.
Is there any reason why Jim has me standing in front of the bus?
Yeah, I think they're trying to run over us. We thought this was pretty good to kind of show you the reunion tour, how serious we are, and all the State Board members. You know, I don't know, if you're lucky enough in your life to get to do what you love, you never, I guess, have a job. And I get to do what I love. And I get to work with some people, 10 members across this state represented here on the bus, that are really, really dedicated to education and to the kids of this state. And they want so much to do a system that you are proud of and that we can go forward. So this is the reunion tour, or as next week, because Dale Dennis will be following us, we're the warm-up band for Dale Dennis, those of you that know Dale. That's how we'll do that. I think it's important as to what's been driving us on this, and that is this. This is data that we've shared with you everywhere we go. If you haven't heard this, we think, you know, like any old rock band, we think we've played this song a lot, but we find out, you know, sometimes a new concert, a new venue, people haven't heard it. The Georgetown Policy Institute's very clear when they look at every state that in Kansas, by 2020, so 4 years from now, 71% of the jobs in our state will require some education past high school. Now, I say that because what you're going to hear today, some people say, well, it makes it sound like we've been doing a horrible job. Now, at the when we turned from 1899 to 1900, 8% of Kansans went to high school. Were we doing a horrible job? No, you didn't need to go to high school. You just didn't need to go to high school. So my grandparents, 6th grade educated. Many people stopped at 6th or 8th grade. Then they could go back to the farm or they could do whatever. As you know, in the last century, we moved that to high school, and now we've got to move it again. We've got to move it again. And so one of the things that I hope we send very clearly the message of, KSB has done some really nice research. Ted Carter has done some really nice research saying, where does Kansas rank on the measures that we want to measure? I think the latest that Ted has done, he's taken maybe 14 measures and said, you look across those measures in kind of a large study, we rank 5th in the nation on those measures. Well, here's one that says we rank 6th for intensity of what it's going to take, which means we have great paying jobs in Kansas. But I will tell you, for all of those things that we do well, and we do things extremely well, this is not here to bash on K-12 or higher ed. We've met every mark that we were asked to meet. I think the data that we're going to share with you today says we got to move the mark again. And that just requires a new thinking. All right, so while we're 5th on all those measures, we're 6th in intensity, I'm going to tell you that what Kansans are telling us is it's not good enough for where we have to go. And that's really what we're here to talk about. If you thought about this data, this is the top bar are the percent of kids from 2007 to 2011 that were going on to post-secondary education in Kansas. The yellow bar are the percent of kids that returned or completed after year 1, and the kind of orange bar is remedial, how many kids need a remedial education. All right, I want to point out something. 2007 to 2011. Tell me what's going on in Kansas at that period of time relative to nationwide or state initiatives. We're at the peak of what era? Yeah, recession's one. That's going to happen nationally. Educationally, though, what's that era? No Child Left Behind. We're at the peak of No Child Left Behind, and we have just hit just short of 90% of Kansas kids are proficient on the state exam. And we have narrowed dramatically our poverty to non-poverty rates and our minority to non-minority rates. We're at the peak of it, somewhere around 2010, 2011. At the peak of that, notice how we don't move at all the number of kids going on to post-secondary. We don't change at all the retention rate, and we don't change at all the percent of kids needing remedial rate. I say that because we did exactly what was asked for us to do in the era of No Child Left Behind. Increase reading and math scores, and if we do that, kids will go on to be more successful. That was right? And we did it, and yet we didn't see this data marker move. In fact, if I said which state in the country is number 1 in education, what would you tell me? Massachusetts. Thank you, Dr. Chappell. Massachusetts oftentimes comes up as number 1 in education. Anyone know why they come up? And almost every U.S. News World Report, Time, Wall Street Journal, Massachusetts number 1. Because they score number 1 on the NAEP score. And they made that a priority about a decade ago. We're going to be number 1 in NAEP, and they are. They may not be in a couple weeks when the new results come out, but they are. They focused on raising NAEP scores. And I was just recently in Boston, and you know what? The Massachusetts State Department said, as we hit number 1 in NAEP scores, this data never moved. The data we were after by raising NAEP scores never moved. So we have to think about that. We have to think differently about that. So that remedial rate of around 30% cost lots of money to our system. We'll talk about whether that needs to be redesigned or whether we need to do a better job there. So tell me what this is. It's Microsoft. All right? Who knows what Microsoft produces? Microsoft produces software, right? Windows operating system. For those of you a little older in the room, DOS. Remember those days? Those were fun, keystroke. Then Windows, Office, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, which I'm using, right? Number one in the world. Paul Allen, Bill Gates, some of the most successful business people ever developing software. This company is, this isn't a trick, Google. What do they do? Yeah, they're a search engine, they're an internet company, right? So I want to ask you this. How many of you did sometime today an internet search for anything, on your phone or anything? All right? How many of you used Bing? Notice we've got 3 people using Bing. How many of you used Google? Sounds like most people are using Google for their internet search. I contend this company would love to be this company in 2015 because let me ask you this, you that are educators, how many of you have moved from Office to Google Docs? Why? Why, Greg? Why have you moved to Google Docs? Flexible and free. Free is always good, right? It's flexible, it's free. You don't have to wait for the update. It just happens. You can share it easily. You don't have to worry. Does someone else have the latest version of Office Suite? Right? And Google is the fastest growing company, large company in America. Microsoft would love to be not a software company, but an internet company. Why can't they be? Why can't Microsoft be Google? They'd love for Bing, they'd love for you to Bing, not Google, they'd love for you to Bing. Because they're a software company. They built their bureaucracy on producing software. They brought in the most brilliant minds in the world to produce software. And then the cloud and the internet became bigger and is becoming bigger, and now they're trying to move that way. But this little company, which isn't little anymore, built their engine on that. It's extremely hard to change who you are to what you want to be. And we're in education. And every one of us went through school and education. Many of us went through college. And we have over 100 years of what school looks like. And for many of us, it's been an extremely successful model. And now we're saying, but we've got to get every kid to a certain level beyond that. How can we become Google? So I asked this question. What is this company? Who is this company? Apple. And what does Apple produce? Yeah. Interesting. So we're on this tour. Brad and I are asking this question. And we say, what does Microsoft produce? Software. What does Google produce? Search engine, internet. What does Apple produce? And there's this 3 seconds of silence because people have to reflect. Does Apple produce this? Yes, they do. Does Apple produce the software that's running this computer? Yes, they do. And if that was all they did, they probably wouldn't be alive today, right? Twice they almost went bankrupt because Steve Jobs bet the farm that you would buy this, and he would only sell you his operating system if you bought this. And Bill Gates said, I don't care about that. If IBM wants to do a computer, if Dell wants to do a computer, if Gateway wants to do a computer, and I just want every one that rolls off the assembly line to have Windows on it. And he won that bet. Jobs got fired from the company he helped create. He came back, and said, we're going to change things. And how many of you have an iPhone that you have? Raise your hand. How many of you have music on your iPhone? Today, Apple makes more money off of these in their music business than they do off of that. Have they abandoned this? No. Think about that with education. This is still part of it. It's just not their major department anymore. They had to shift. So I think we've got to try to become Apple. We still have to do what we do, but we're going to have to shift to some new things. And this data, Kansans are telling us, this isn't just Randy standing up in front of you. Kansans are telling us we need you to move and shift. Not because of what we've done is bad. It's been really good because what we need in the future is going to need to be something a little different. So Brad's going to walk you through what we found when we went on the tour. Then I'll kind of come back at the end, tell you what the state board's doing with that. And in the meanwhile, you've got some cream-colored cards there, and we can give you more. You can take notes with that, but we will want your feedback on that. So yes, we're going to get some oral conversation going, but we don't want anyone's idea or anyone's thought to be left. So if you want to start jotting down not only notes and you want some more, raise your hand and Brad or I will come by and give you some more if you want some more.
And the only reason Doug Meckel from KSB is here, when this is done, he'll be standing at the door and you cannot walk out with one of these. Because as we go through this, what you're recording, we're going to take from you because this is what you want the state board to consider. So as we go through, just jot things down. We need to, yes, we need this more rigorous. Let's look at this. So this is how you're going to give input back to the state board as we're going through this. And again, I do want to say that what I'm about ready to share with you might be the 30-minute version of a 3-day in-depth conversation that some researchers at K-State and in our office would love to hang out with people that really enjoy data, because we spent about 4 months analyzing the whole methodology behind it and the research. But we're going to give you the 30-minute version. If you want the down in the weeds, we have people that would like to take you there. So when we started out with the board last January, we really said, what is it that we want to know? And the first thing was, what are the skills, attributes, and abilities of a successful 24-year-old? The reason we chose that, because hopefully by that time, they've made it through at least some post-secondary, or they're out in the workforce employed, both K-12 and higher ed. The second thing we wanted to find out, how were the views similar or different from educators, community people, and business and industry? Third, how could these sectors better work together and collaborate to reach the goals that we want? And finally, how would we know that we're being successful? What measures would we know that we could say, yes, here's where we want to go, and here's how we're going to measure it? So we went across the state last spring to 20 different locations. And after we went through those, and we'll share you some of that, we decided that participation rate, we needed more business and industry voice in this. So we went back out to 7 other locations across the state, tried to go to different communities than what we had visited first, specifically to get business and industry voice. We did come to Wichita both times. So when we started with just those first 20, we went out and asked the question on the left. We had right around 1,700 Kansans across the state attended. And I'll kind of show you a representative of those here in a second. We actually had one in this room. We broke everybody up. You couldn't sit at a table with someone you rode with, had the same job description. We wanted students, spread out, higher ed, all of it. And we had 287 focus groups that consisted of about 6 people each in each group. So with that community conversation, what did they tell us? These were the groups. And in working with K-State, their research analysts, they're like, if you could get 99 students demographically from all over the state, that's a pretty good study. 110 higher ed individuals from 4-year to 2-year to technical, that's a pretty good study. But when you get all of these types of groups, legislators, public officials, 77, that's a pretty good representation of the voice of Kansas. So what did they tell us of the characteristics of that 24-year-old? 23% of everything they said fell in the academic area. And we'll break these down a little bit more. We're not going to get clear into the weeds. We'll save that for another time. 70% of the characteristics were in the area of non-academic. 3% health, mental and physical. 2%, 24-year-olds, we want you out of our basement, employed. And 2%, having some type of a credential. And I think if we'd have phrased the question a little differently, I think credentials would have been huge. So when we break down the academic skills, it was really in 3 areas of academic readiness. 5% were traditional. You know, the math, the literacy, the reading. But more important than just the traditional academic skills were those critical thinking skills.
And we're hoping that as we put together a state assessment to measure those high-level skills, that does those 2 areas really well. That's our hope, that any assessment that we would give would measure those in equal weights.
Because those of you that were involved in the old assessment, it was a multiple choice. Measured strongly the traditional academic, but the new assessments require the students to actually get engaged, take the material, learn from it, plot, graph, which will measure a much deeper level of those critical thinking skills. But even more important than those 2 in the area of academics is those instrumental skills, those applied skills. Can they take the traditional with critical thinking and apply it to real-world situations?
We get a little bit of that off of our new assessment system, but we don't get into the depth of what people told us. So we'll have to think about that when we think about what they said to do to design schools.
But when we start breaking down the non-academic, what Kansans told us, it was really in 2 groups. There were interpersonal skills and intrapersonal skills. So as we dig into the interpersonal, there were several categories that came up pretty strong in those areas. First one, 5% of everything they said dealt with communication. Our students have to be strong communicators and have skills in that area. Multiple language, cultural skills. And remember, we went to 20 locations all across the state, and we have them even broken down by locations. Obviously, Southwest in the Kansas City area, this came up even stronger. Other social group skills like teamwork, citizenship, ethics, duties to others.
This really resonated with us because how large it was representative of those other skill sets. Kansans told us we're not producing good enough citizens as they exit our schools, especially giving back to others and duties to others. And we thought that would come out, just not to the extent that it came out in this.
And the value of this to a school district is when I get a call like I did last May, and I have a parent say, legally, can my local school district require my daughter to serve 40 hours of community service in order to graduate? My answer was, yes, they can. That's a local decision. And you know what? Kansans told us that those types of skills are highly valued. I mean, it just kind of gives some credibility to what a lot of schools are already doing because Kansas said, we want that. Support those local decisions. 1% of them were family skills, and there were 2% social tolerance and flexibility. When we got into those personality skills, those intrapersonal, there were several themes broken up into it. And when you look at those, 5% of them were agreeableness. Those were the types of things that people were saying that were extremely important in customer service, or just the overall organizational effectiveness. You think about your school districts, your businesses. These are the types of the skills that get employees to work well together. But by far the largest from the community groups was the category called conscientiousness. And these are the types of skills that fell into that area. Achievement striving, having goals, self-discipline, dutifulness. By far the largest category of what Kansans said. 3% were extroversion. Those are things like assertiveness, confidence, students and young adults that are willing to take risks. Emotional stability. Now, when we went through this and worked with K-State, we always try to say, well, how does that align with what we see nationally? There's even some national research that even puts even a stronger emphasis on that emotional stability area. And then openness, like adaptability, independence, experiential openness, creativity. Those are the types of characteristics that people were saying, 11%. So when we looked at that and tried to pull the research together from the community groups, we started saying, well, how does that align with what we might see nationally? In the academic skills, employers prefer, looking at the national research, the number one, conscientiousness. The second one, agreeableness. This is what employers are saying they want in their employees. Emotional stability is number 3. So we think what Kansans were saying has some strong validity to that. That's what employers are saying all across the nation. So some of the take-home lessons, Kansans in those first 20 to a 7-2 ratio, we're saying non-academic skills need to be more emphasized. Not that academic is not important, but what has trumped the conversation for the last decade? State assessments that measure academic by themselves. 7-2 ratio. We thought...
I think we're a little surprised by the intensity of that. I think we thought we would hear that, but not to that ratio that we heard.
Conscientiousness from Kansans was the highest set of skills that they said were valued. And even among the academic, remember 23% of it, which is huge. I mean, that's a large value. But in the academic, those applied academic skills were the most important. Instead of just the traditional, we got to teach kids how not only critical thinking, but how to apply them into real world on-the-job situations. So again, like we said, we came back, had all of that. 0.4% of the attendees were business and industry. So Randy said, we're going back out. Get the bus filled up.
And this time we worked directly with Chamber of Commerce's. And so those 7 sites that Brad will talk about were put together with Chamber of Commerce help.
This picture here happened to be the Chamber of Commerce in Manhattan. But across the state, we had 127 individuals representing 110 businesses. This was the location and the percent of involvement from those business and industry. But I think one of the most important one is what size did they represent. 2 of them were independent. Clear down to 19 of them employed 500 employees or more. But the strongest one is what we always believe is, and we talk about the most important, small business in Kansas. 28 from 1 to 10 and 28 from 11 to 50. So we think we had a real good voice from business and industry all across the state. So what did they tell us?
We really thought we would hear this. Can they just count back change? Can they use a tape measure? And we heard that, but not in the ratio of what we heard. They told us to even stronger than the community groups. we've got kids that do not have the non-academic skills to be successful in the workforce.
So when we broke down the academic skills from business and industry, they said they need those traditional academic skills.
2% of the responses said that's the most important thing we need is that basic academic. These are business leaders across this state.
But even a little stronger in the academic area is the critical thinking, those academic critical thinking skills. And just like the community, academically, they have to be able to apply them to on-the-job, real-world situations, those instrumental or applied skills. With the non-academic, again, it was broken down into the interpersonal and intrapersonal, a little bit different from the community groups, but I think the important thing is it was much stronger than the other areas. When we broke down the interpersonal skills, communication, there was even a little more than the community. Business and industry, we've got to have employees that have strong communication skills, both verbal and written. In this one here, I'm glad we saw it, but it's even a little more than the community that business and industry are saying we want employees that are not only good citizens, but will give back to their communities. 7% of everything they said.
And we really didn't think business and industry would give us this kind of feedback. We thought we'd get a little bit of that from the community, but business, to the degree, as Brad said, even a little bit stronger, said we want that in our employees too. That's some data that the state board's really been looking at.
Conflict resolution, family skills, and that social tolerance and flexibility, along with those other social group skills like teamwork. The intrapersonal skills, something ought to jump out immediately. Same thing with the community groups, was that conscientiousness. Again, 7% agreeableness, very similar, just 2% away from what the community groups. But the conscientious, those types of skills, 34% of all the responses from business and industry fell in this area.
And they said to us very clearly, we're not getting that out of K-12 or higher ed. We're not getting that. We'll talk a little bit about what they said, that we think some of the reasons. We're not getting that. And what we heard from both parties is you've been so focused on the academic basic skills that you're out of balance in what we need for successful young people.
The emotional stability, 3%. Those extroversion skills, assertiveness, willing to take risks, and openness. Once we had that, we could begin to start answering some of our earlier questions. What skills do Kansans expect from K-12 and higher ed to cultivate those in our young adults? And how do the views, are they similar? Are they different from the communities to the educators to the business and industry? And again, both of them on a 7-to-2 ratio, non-academic versus the academic, with conscientiousness as number one. Other mutually agreed upon characteristics from both groups, the critical thinking, openness, communication, group skills, citizenship. Traditional academic skills and applied skills are important, but we've got to find a balance. So just the academic doesn't trump all of the other skills that Kansans said are important. There was a second question, then we said, all right, if that's what we want, we said, well, all right, then what's our role? And how would we measure it? So that came in really two broad categories. 37% talked about skill training that we have to embed in our students, and 63% were there's some strategic activities that we ought to have in our school districts, in our schools, that will help build those skills. So when we looked at the skill training, we broke it down into several categories. And the first one, we've got to be able to develop those instrumental skills, those applied skills. Those non-academic skills, we've heard it, we've talked about it. It's the soft skills, the employability skills, 21st century, On the way down to Hutchinson this morning, Randy was on the phone with Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan. He was saying, Randy, we got to come up with a better way to describe that. Maybe you can help us. The academic skills, we have to have rigorous curriculum, rigorous standards. We have to set the bar high academically, and we have to do a better job of strategies to help kids think critically. When we broke down the instrumental, and again, we can get way into the weeds on this. You're getting the 10,000-foot view. But these were all the types of things that they were saying. You know, job exposure, internship, work studies, mentoring programs.
And business said to us, look, we are sick and tired of you putting us on advisory committees that meet a couple times a year and do nothing. We want to help. We want to come in and you're not asking us. Now, you know, Brad and I are educators and we just took it, you know, because our job was we really wanted to listen. And that's what they said. You've got these advisory groups, that's nice. We help you develop the curriculum. We need to produce different people coming out of schools, and we think you're in a parallel universe with us. And so that's what they're saying. We'll help you get them on the job training. We'll help you with internships. We'll come in, you know, and speak about it. We'll bring workers in. We'll give you tours. We want to partner with you, but you don't ask us.
And then working with the researchers at K-State, they said, Brad, as you start going through all of this data, the number one thing you have to do is open your mind. Just categorize it, analyze it, but you can't go into it trying to find something. Analyze it all and then find out what they said. Don't look for something specific. Just report out exactly what, so like Randy said, this is what people said.
37% of the responses we've just been talking about are things that we can tweak in school. All right, those things. 9% of that 37 is the standardized test. So this past month, as we released the new results of the Kansas assessment, if you want to know why Brad and I and the state board have been going nuts over media reports that are trying to take that assessment and make it mean more than what it means, because Kansas told us it's only 9% of what we think you ought to be about. It's important, but if you don't put it in perspective. And so the first news report I saw on it was out of Topeka said students are doing worse or students score lower. They're not scoring lower. We raised the bar significantly higher. And that's the only academic. So 63% of what Brad's going to go through when they said, how do we do this, is about the redesign of school, which really, it's that moving to Apple. It's redesigning school of what they said that we need to do.
So these are the strategic activities, and as we go into them, from left to right is the highest importance or the most commonly stated activities to the least common. The highest response on what we ought to do activity-wise and focus on school climate.
And you'll see here high expectations. Used to be high expectations meant graduate high school. Then, quickly, the high expectations were everyone's going to college, right? Here's what we heard. You value certain kids more than you value other kids. And so if there's a message that I took out of all those 27 sites when it came to this, was when we honor the class of 2016, whether it's coming out of college or coming out of high school, we need to have our arm around the kid that's going to Wichita Technical College to be a welder. Right alongside, we got our arm around the kid going to KU to be a pharmacist, because Kansas told us you're treating one like a second-class citizen, another one like a first-class citizen, and we need to stop it. That both of those kids are equally important in value, and we need to treat it that way, and that's what the culture needs to shift. Now, it's unclear some of the other responses, but that part of it was pretty clear.
And as far as a positive, supportive culture, I don't think most people realize Kansas was the leading and first state in the nation to develop our own social, emotional, and character development standards. How do we embed in our students the type of culture and climate that allows number one set of responses and activities. Second, career planning. We've got to help kids explore, find out what they're passionate about, and help in career planning.
This is not an individual plan that simply puts the courses for the next 4 years you're going to take. It's not what this is talking about. So recently we were at K-State and I got to run into a young man that I student taught with. I hadn't seen him since we student taught. And the morning that we got in the car to go to Fort Riley to student teach, we had a third gentleman with us. And after the first day, we're riding back from Fort Riley, having student taught our first day, and the young man says, I don't like children. I don't like kids. Not a good opportunity. You just spent the last 4 years of your life getting ready to be a teacher. We've got to do this better. Kansans said, you've got to do this better.
The third largest, family engagement. We have to get our parents engaged earlier, more often, in where their child, what their dreams are, where they want to go, and how we can better meet their needs.
So one of the things, Paula, used to drive me crazy as superintendent, we'd have parent-teacher conferences in the spring at the high school, and 35% of parents would show up. And then we'd get all the administrators together and we'd say, wow, we had this, 35% of parents showed up, teachers were going to sleep, nobody's there, we took time out of doing it. And what do you think the complaint was? Parents that didn't show up. The parents that needed to come didn't come. We saw the parents that kids were doing great. And so guess what we did the next year? The same thing. All right? When we shifted, little shift, meeting with every parent to discuss the future, we went from 35 to 98% participation. So family involvement is how do we truly engage families and kids about their future? And if we're not getting there, we're going to have to change our models.
Community collaboration. And even from business and industry, they said, we do a much better job in the area of career tech ed. Every pathway, we've got business and industry sitting on those, approving the pathways in the curriculum, but nobody asks us about general ed. So how can we get better collaboration with our communities, our business and industry? Individualized instruction and experience. Again, those individual plans of study. There wasn't a lot of clarity. Do you start at 6th grade, 8th grade? But the huge value that we've got to have parents engaged early on about where their child, what their skills are, their abilities, where they want to go, and how can we individualize it. Real-world instruction, again, came up repeatedly. We've got to do a better job with activities and within our system to get students more real-world instruction. Project-based learning, early childhood. If we can close the gap before kindergarten starts, how we could reinvest all the other things that we've been doing to try and close the gap or catch up later on.
Most of the cost-effective ways we could do that is engage in early childhood. I just would ask this. If we were to look at the largest proportion of kids living in poverty in Kansas, can you tell me where the majority of kids in poverty are living in Kansas? 3 counties. 3 counties. The majority of kids are in Sedgwick, Shawnee, and Wyandotte counties. Now, the majority of schools with kids in them are not in those counties. The majority of kids are in those. And yet, somewhere, we don't have really good records because it's so diversified. Somewhere between a third and half of the kids in those counties are in any kind of pre-K education. I mean, think about that just as a policy type of statement.
But there were other less frequently strategies, and we just threw all those up there at once, but extracurricular activities. Where do students learn a lot of these skills? In the debates, the arts, getting kids engaged in extracurricular activities, teaching techniques, human capital. So a few take-home lessons on the role of K-12, possibly redesigning the curriculum.
So think about this. If the student is the center, of how we think about the future, and you focus on with the student and the family of what they need to move forward, then that changes your whole system design and how you think about it versus, well, how are the fourth graders doing? When you think about that as a class, that drives you how to move aggregate data. When you think about the student, I'll come to an example here in a few minutes, that really changes your design.
New roles be suggested for counselors, career planning.
Let me ask this. In schools, especially high schools, what do school counselors do primarily today in schools? Give me some examples of that, what that would be. That's a huge part of it, right? Enrollment, drops, master schedule, setting up courses, making sure they balance. And then I would say maybe crisis, kids in crisis. So, yeah, and then principals and superintendents, what have we done as we've faced some budget cuts? We've cut counselors. So, we haven't talked about funding because we don't think you can talk about funding until you talk about what Kansans want and where we're going to go. And then how do you fund that? And some people have said, Randy, when we're done, this is going to cost more money. Some people have said, Randy, this is going to cost less money. I don't know. All I know is Kansas are saying we need a different role for counselors than doing just that.
And a large portion of the instrumental skills included that experiential training.
And what percent of our student body is engaged in internships, job shadowing, or integrated coordination with business and community? Integrated tightly.
And one of the other biggest ones we said, school climate, it's extremely important, but we got to better define it. So what they say about measures, if we're going to try not to just say it's all about the state test, what are other measures? Those non-cognitive, social-emotional measures, conscientiousness, how do we measure those? And we're not even suggesting that we create something at a state level. You probably know how to measure those better than anybody in the state. But how do we allow those to be valued? Project and task-based individual planning. What percent of our kids are graduating that they've had an individual plan of study that ended with a postgraduate plan, and they've got it mapped out. They know what it's going to cost. They know what it's going to lead to. They know it aligns to something they're passionate about, something totally different than what we've talked about. And like Randy showed you earlier, maybe some of those post-high school measures, remediation rates, persistency rates, going rates.
So the state board has spent some time looking at all this data in depth. By the way, those of you that are researchers in the crowd would like to spend time with Tony Moss or K-State, we'd be happy to set a little retreat for the next 2 weeks where you can delve into this data into great, great detail. Tony, I think, gave us like 96 slides. Said, oh, we're so excited.
That was on the first question.
Yeah, that was on the first. Yeah, no, Tony, we really appreciate that, but it's a little much. So the state board's working on a vision. Where do we want to go? And you're going to get to vote. You're going to get to vote. We have a choice of two. Here's one. Kansas leads the world in student success. We're using the word success and not achievement anymore to encompass all of the skill sets that kids need. So that's option one. And you can write this down on your card. You can either write the words or you can write option one or option A. Here's the second one. Or do you like this? Kansas leads the world in the success of each student. I'll flip back and forth. That's option two or option B. Kansas leads the world in the success of each student. Or Kansas leads the world in student success. This is number one or number A. If you like this one. If you like this one, you can put number two or B, or you can write it out. Your choice. Yes?
Are there differences between those two as subtle as they appear, or do you have a difference you want to explain to me?
Yeah, they're very subtle, but this, for some people, says just what it says. We're going to lead the world in student success. For some people, though, they say that's aggregate data. We're just looking at big data. If you do this, you're focused on every individual student. So that's why we brought you both as to whether, see which one you like. And the state board was debating that. Thank you for that question. So again, number 1 or number 2 or A, B as we go forward. And Jim and the other state board members will be collecting this and bringing it back to them in October. So the state board's been looking at this. We're going to ask this question. This is not done information, right? Jim and I were talking about that as we came in. We're not done with this. We're out here to tell you, here's what Kansans told us. Here's what the state board's planning to do. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you like it in certain levels of intensity? So what if we move the outcomes? By the way, the outcomes today, or traditionally, historically in the last decade, have been when the Wichita Eagle decides how are schools doing, what have they printed? Test scores, your reading and math scores, right? And then maybe they even sorted it by school. Okay? That's been, I guess, the outcome that we've been asked to go about achieving. What if we move that to high school graduation rates? It's a question. Right now in Kansas, 85% of kids graduate high school. So those 15% that do not graduate high school, do you know that there's less than a 10% chance that those kids will ever move into the middle class? That wasn't true 40 years ago, by the way. It was not true 40 years ago. So it's not impossible for a high school dropout not to be Bill Gates. It's just not probable. So what if we measured high school graduation rate as outcome? I'm talking about the state level. What if we looked at post-secondary completion or persistence? So how many kids leave with a certificate? How many kids persist to an associate degree? Now, if you like that, one of the real challenges is when do we hand off to higher ed, right? I mean, you know, Diane may say, hey, Randy, is it my responsibility 6 years out for this kid? Where is the handoff? I don't know. Is it a semester and they return? Is it a year? Is it 18 months? Tom Trigg and I used to have this great discussion. When's the handoff? I don't know. We'd have to figure that out. So just realize we don't know where the handoff is, but maybe it's I completed a semester after high school. I came back for the second semester, and K-12 counts that as completed. Now it's higher ed. Maybe it's a year. I don't know. Or they've completed something. Remedial rate of students attending. The number one barrier between a credential in auto mechanics and an associate degree in auto mechanics is what? Tell me the number one barrier for that movement. I have a credential and I'd like to have an associate degree in auto mechanics or welding or construction. What's the number one barrier to Kansas in moving from credential to associate degree? College algebra. Passing college algebra. So we either have to go about asking the question, do we need college algebra? Looking back there at Ed Berger, former president of Hutch Community College, do we need it for every kid, right? And if we do need it, how are we going to get there? I mean, those are good questions. First question, do we need it in its current state? Because that is costing the state of Kansas a lot of money.
In the meantime, a year and a half ago, we pulled together high school math teachers and college level math teachers and said, the senior year is extremely important to a kid's success. What if we could design a course? We've tested the kid for 7 years in a row. We got a pretty good idea if they're academically on track in math. What if we created a course their senior year that if they took it and performed well enough, and Board of Regents says if they did, we'll accept that for credit bearing. Because what's most important to higher ed is they have those skills. So why don't we remediate them their senior year? So we'll be piloting that class this year with some math instructors across the state. So we're trying to move that direction. But these are some of the things that, well, what if we looked at reducing those remediation rates?
And if you were to just put into numbers what Kansans need to fulfill the job market that's laid out in front of them, Craig, at Derby, just to use raw numbers, you'd have to have a 90% graduation rate with an 80% completion of post-secondary or persistence. That would give you a 72% from the start of that freshman year to the number of kids that are entering that job market. Far too often, we only count the graduates. We forget about the kids that dropped out. And then, higher ed's got a huge role in this. I mean, we're not here to represent higher ed, but their graduation rates are not as good as K-12. So I'm not letting them off the hook. I'm just saying that's not we're working with them. But we've got, this is a Kansas issue. It's not about a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a Kansas issue. So I want you to ponder and write down for us, what if the state looked at these outcomes? That's not very many. There's pluses and minuses to that. School may need to be redesigned. That's what this data is telling us. Apple still produces a computer. In 1985, this is all they produced, that and the software. So how big was that department? It's 100% of their organization. Is it 100% of their organization today? They still do it. So if you're thinking about school and 75% of our kids, 80% of our kids at Mays High School is being successful, then we don't want to change much for those 85%, right? But we're going to have different divisions that talk about doing it. So we may need to redesign. We may need to make changes to school culture where every kid that has a post-secondary plan is valued. By the way, you know this, that in many cases, those certificate kids and 2-year associate degree kids are making more money than the 4-year university kids at a lot less debt. Not in all cases, not in your STEM cases, but in many cases. And money's not everything that's driving this, but you got to look at that. There was a day that I went to school where you could have a part-time job, a little bit of scholarship work in the summer, and you left college without debt. I can tell you, my kids, 2005 high school grad and 2011 high school grad, both graduated college, they both left with debt, and they worked and had scholarships through college. A new dynamic role for counselors and social workers. How about this? Maybe we have to have some. School needs to be reorganized around the student, not the system. You say, yeah, Randy, we do that. We love kids. I want to give you an example of how hard this is. Because we built a schedule. The bell just rang, by the way. You know what that means? We were all to get up and go somewhere else. That's an organizational system. And it works fine for many kids. But think about this. So we had a phone call. A young lady went to Nashville. This is one of our students in high school in Kansas today. And she's cutting a record. Is that what you still call it today? Cutting an album. She's got a record deal in Nashville. And she's producing her first CD album. It's all streamed now. You don't buy anything. And she misses choir back at her high school. And the choir teacher says, well, you missed class, so you've got to write a report. And the parent's going, my kid is traveling some nationally singing and has just has a recording contract, just cut their first album, and we've got to do a report because we missed class because she's singing? Right? The parent's saying it doesn't make sense. And this is a parent's very supportive. So the choir teacher says, what? Come on, If I did it for her, I'd have to do it for everyone. Because everyone may go to Nashville and cut a record. School's not organized around the students. We're not organized around the class. And of course, the principal says, well, I got to support the teacher because we'd have chaos if everyone got to go sing and cut, get their own record deal. And the parents going, this doesn't make sense. So Brad and I have been in those shoes, and it's tough. It's tough to know how do you standardize something versus how do you allow independence of something. Collaboration with business, is critical. They are telling us we are not producing the kids that they need and the skills that they need.
But they are very hungry to partner.
Internships and job shadowing are going to be important, especially for kids that don't know what they want to do.
I'm going to give you an example. What if every K-12 teacher had to have a business and industry mentor? I mean, those were just kind of some of the things that they were talking about. Every school administrator has to have a business industry mentor to sit down. I mean, don't know if it's right, but those were coming from business and industry saying, we need to partner with you and have better dialogue and communication.
Those skill sets that young people used to bring to the workforce, they're not bringing today. Business said, not your fault. It's the changing demographics. A generation ago, kids worked on the farm or they had part-time jobs. Many of our kids today don't. They're in band and music and right, they're busy. So today, I stayed the night in McPherson, and this morning the Salina Journal was delivered to my door still, and the McPherson Sentinel delivered to my door, both of those delivered by middle-aged men, 55-year-old men. I used to have a paper route. No kids doing it. You know what we're missing right now? To listen to the two of us give a boring presentation. We're missing happy hour at the Sonic right now, 2 to 4, half price drinks. And if we were to all run to the Sonic, we probably are going to get served by adults, not kids. You know, not even after school, right? Even if school's out, most of those jobs are taken up by. So we have kids entering the job market that have really never had a job. So when Ray says we start at 8 o'clock and they show up at 8:20, hey, we started at 8 o'clock, Jim. Yeah, I'm here. I'm close. Because I've never had to show up, you know. Or, hey, when do I get promoted? You know, like first day, right? I want to be the CEO tomorrow. It takes a while. So what should we focus on? Should these be outcomes or indicators? And I ask you to think about this. Should Wichita look at these as indications to outcomes, or do you want the state to look at these for you? And I say that because I think the state board's wrestling with this. Academic readiness. How much do you want us to put on test scores? ACT, SAT, state assessment scores. And I'm talking about the state level. Do you want us to rank order schools by ACT? By ACT work keys? By state assessments? Or do you want to say, hey, that's only an indicator, we want to manage that locally? Soft skills. Do you want Brad's division to come up with a persistence test? Or do you want to say, no, don't do that. It'll drive the wrong things. Let us use that, in Andover, but let us have control. Let us do Gallup, in terms of climate, or let's use ACT, Engage. We need your feedback on that. Character ed. We have, as Brad said, some of the best standards in the country related to character ed. Do you want to have to formally report that to the state board? Or do you want to do it locally as an indicator of future success?
And at the same time, maybe only a third of our school districts even have the socio-emotional character ed development. That's what we need. What do we change? What do we look at? We need your input on.
We've got to match career choice with the passion of a student. I tell this story often, but I think it's illustrative of if this is done well, what can happen. So my son is autistic. He's a 2011 high school graduate. He didn't care to go to prom. He didn't care to venture out much, except he had a little karate activity that he engaged in. He was a good student. And one day, he comes to his mother and I and says, I know where I want to go to school. His idea of fun is just hanging out in his room all day. I'm going to go to Savannah, Georgia, to the Savannah College of Art and Design and major in animation. And Debbie and I looked at each other and go, well, this has no chance of success. This is a disaster. This will last 2 weeks. 4 years he graduated with honors with a degree in animation. Now he called home every night. Why? Because his passion to do that trumped his disability. If you would ask me 4 years ago, you just graduated in June. If you'd asked me 4 years ago, I said, there's no way. And I'm his dad, right? I live with him every day. There's no way. It trumped it. It trumped it. And I had to, at least, in that story, become a believer. And if you can match that, kids will persist in what they're passionate about. What they won't persist is what they don't care about. And that's, for us, it's trying to match that. It's trying to match that. You got to have students involved in activities. We don't have to own those. Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, church youth groups, deeply involved. 4-H activities, band, choir, football. By the way, in most of our communities, that starts in elementary school, right? You show up, when does soccer start? When does soccer start in the Wichita area, formally? 7th grade? Can you play soccer for your school in 7th grade? Freshman in high school? Okay, so I'm a freshman, and I'm showing up for the first day of soccer. I'm going to be a soccer star. I've never played in my life, but I'm going to be a soccer star. What happens to that kid? Yeah, 3 weeks into it, they're going home going, hey, I'm not any good at soccer because all these other kids are whizzing by me because they've been playing since 2nd grade, right? This starts in elementary school. And it really has an impact on poverty. Have students involved in volunteerism. Kansans said we want to do that. Every student individual plan of study, we talked about that. That does not mean, again, here are your courses to take next year. It's what are you wanting to do, and now let's design the courses to take.
And just to remind you, 2 years ago, the state board said that they came out and said we strongly encourage that every kid in Kansas, at a minimum starting at the 8th grade, have an individual plan of study. They didn't mandate it, they strongly encouraged. Those are the types of things we need input from you. Is that important? Is it,
So we need to know, do you want us to collect that data? Because when we do, you know what that does. When we mandate something, it changes the whole dynamic. Or do you say, no, Randy, that's something that's just an indicator. You measure those outcomes. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question, and I probably should have asked it sooner. You started off with a 24-year-old student, a successful 24-year-old student. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, what level of job do I expect a 24-year-old to have? When I think of a 24-year-old in Kansas, I don't think of a CEO. Is a 24-year-old somebody that you see in retail? Is a 24-year-old somebody that you see at McDonald's or Sonic? And if that's where my 24-year-old is, then those skills that I'm going to identify as important are going to be totally different versus a 24-year-old technology geek or somebody that's in another state where more professional jobs exist. So for me, as you go through this, not that the problem is the conclusions that you reach, but I'm just kind of wondering, if I were taking that survey, what would that 24-year-old person look like to me?
That's a great question, because what we didn't want to do is say, what job should they have? It's what skills should they have? And the reason...
Characteristics.
What characteristics? Because if a kid wants to be an engineer, there's a set of skills that they would have had to be successful to go through a 4-year post-secondary. If a kid wants to enter right into the workforce, business is saying so that's what we were looking at. What are the skills that they need to be successful? Because many skills that you need to have to be successful in the workforce are the same skills that you're going to need to successfully complete a 4-year degree. So that's why we were looking at the skills and characteristics and abilities.
And I guess I understand that what I'm saying, the kinds of skills, 24-year-old, if my mindset or my focus is that they are going to be manufacturing or in retail, what are the problems that I tend to see in that industry level? I, as a consumer, go and I see young people in stores and I think about the kinds of things that I wish they could do a little better. Or I think about you're in manufacturing, showing up on time may be significant. So those skills are related to the level that we expect that they're performing. So if I were taking that test and given that that's what my vision would be, which is pretty narrow, I am wondering, just in terms of your test results, if they weren't skewed by that. That's really.
Let me just kind of go back to what we did. So we had people, when we were in this room, one of those, we put people in groups of about 6 if we could. And we asked that question, had them discuss, and then they reported out to us. So it was kind of a focus group approach. So you're right. Any person could have brought whatever bias or however they thought about that to the table. What we tried to do was get enough voice over the course of the state and then analyze that. I don't know that, if we calculated for that, but that's the way the study was set up. It was set up to ask the question when a student would probably be close to ending their formal education, and then ask what skills and attributes, success measures. And I think you're right. I think people, maybe a manufacturer, business person brought certain, let me look at it through this lens. A university person may have looked at it through this lens, a parent. So I think we all looked at it through different lenses, and then we try to tabulate those results across that spectrum.
And you mentioned the test. That's one thing we didn't want. Now, we did also do this online. We allowed people to get online, and it was, I don't want to say a test, it was more a survey, and they went through and answered the same questions, but what they were missing, and the reason, and I remember someone in Kansas City asking Randy and said, why don't you just put this out as a survey? And Randy said, well, you're not from Kansas, are you? Because we wanted to go out and we wanted people to have dialogue around the questions, to be able to ask those and have dialogue and report out. But what we found when we looked at the survey answers and compared them to this, because we had well over 100 people logged in, wasn't a lot different in responses. But we wanted to ensure that people had enough dialogue and voice around it instead of just taking a test.
But I think your comments are well taken in terms of how we look at this and making sure we don't make any too broad of conclusions. Yes, ma'am.
Well, in looking at your constituencies numbers from your tour that you took back in January through March, it cites that there were 223 teachers. Were they divided? Were they, I know that these meetings are held during the day when most active teachers are in their classroom teaching students. Did some of these other meetings occur when other teachers could come, or were they also invited?
Yes, so let's talk about 2 things in the methodology of that. One, this is a focus group, meaning we didn't go to the mall and just survey people that walked by. So people were invited, and we did some evening sessions. We did sessions specifically at KNEA, but we did, I don't know, of the 27, well, the 7 chambers were during the day, but the 25 or 6 of those were in the evening across the state. So obviously, just like today, people that come have some interest in this conversation versus the man on the street to speak of. And we've got a couple of evening activities planned on this one too. So yes, both. We didn't get every educator, but we got a large portion of the responses were from educators. We were trying to get a cross sample and using K-State to determine the methodology of which we did the focus groups so that we could, as I said, they said it's the largest qualitative study they've ever done in this sense. So we've been purposeful in trying to say we're gathering the voices of Kansas. And yeah, we know we didn't get every voice. But we've tried to do it. As 27 different sites that we went to, and then we had an online presence. Now we're going back to 10, and we've got an online presence again. So let me just take you through where the state board is. They met in August and September, and they looked at the data more in depth, the same data you looked at. They're coming back on October 14th, and they want to see your results, your comments, your questions, your statements to us. They're going to take that, and they're going to develop the vision for education, and they're going to launch that on October 27th, right here in Wichita, Hyatt Regency. I've already mentioned that. Please come. Please come. Please sign up. We're going to stand together and we'll say, here's where Kansas is going to go. Then we can talk about how do we fund it. But if we jump to the funding question first, we're going to be at odds about what we're trying to fund. We have to have agreement where we want to go, and as some people have said to us, Randy, this will cost more. Randy, this will cost less. But we have to know where we're going to go, so we encourage you to come. Here's where we're headed. We've been in Topeka, Hutch in Wichita today. Be at Ellis. That's a combination of communities coming together at Ellis. Then Sublette, Oakley, Salina, Olathe, Greenbush, Clearwater. Actually, one that's not on there will be at Altamont, Labette County Community College for an evening session right before we do Greenbush in southeast Kansas. And then we have an online presence. What questions can we answer for you? But what's really important is that you write down, so if your voice isn't heard orally today, it will be carried back and heard. This is not something the State Board and the State Department are checking off, right? Parental involvement, community involvement, we check it off, we got it. We're really talking about fundamentally trying to learn what Kansans want, and then how do we go about delivering that. So what questions can Brad and I maybe ask? You guys have asked great comments and questions so far. What else? Yes?
Well, I feel like if you, based on your presentation today, if you look at your measures of success and include those three, enrollment, retention, and remediation, you cannot overlook an experience that involves internship, job shadowing, or mentoring. And I know that's not so easy to quantify and measure across the board, but it could be as simple as a yes/no question at graduation that either they have or they haven't, and you get a percentage.
Okay.
So
you think it's really important then for those experiences to occur prior to graduation?
and if you don't on the slate to be measured or evaluated, then you minimize the value of what your presentation said was important.
Okay. One of the struggles that we have, Kansas is extremely a locally controlled state where we give a lot of authority back to the local districts. And that's why that's the State Board's going to wrestle with that. So thank you. Yes, ma'am.
The thing I was thinking about when you first started off, and you were talking about 2020, and you gave a percentage of jobs that would be post-secondary.
Correct.
Then I would wonder how these visions and expectations actually are aligned with more the future instead of where we are currently. I think that that's really significant.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
My question is about the two vision options. They both are great and they both have the word world in them, but everything we talked about today is what Kansas constituents feel is important for the 24-year-old in Kansas. Is or has the state looked at how those compare with what the world standards of success are?
Yes, and that's Brad shared some of that with you. So all along as we got these results, Kansas State then said, we've got to look at national and state research to see if these align or where they differ. So we asked Kansans what Kansas should know, but our measure is that some Kansas kids in schools aren't going to stay in Kansas. Right? They're going to go elsewhere. So we're trying to, the vision, lead the world. I think one of the state board members said, won't it be cool when companies outside of Kansas come to recruit our kids as sixth graders because they're just so great. You know, kind of like athletes. We're going to sign them early because we just got to have them working at Google or wherever it is. I mean, that's just kind of as we discussed it. But we have to make sure that whatever Kansas said is externally validated, and Brad's been doing that work with Kansas State.
I heard national, but I'm thinking since we have the word
Oh.
There are certain ways that we can say, you know, if we want to be, you know, Randy just threw up some examples of some measures. Well, if we want to lead the world and the percent of our students that have completed some type of, you know, that we could do that. If that's what Kansas said we want, we would be able to say, yeah, or, you know, whatever it is, but we don't, you know, how would we know we're going to be there? And what we want to know is what Kansas said what we want first.
That's great. Thank you very much. Yes?
I guess, you know, there's really nothing to argue about in this. I mean, I've seen it, I've heard it for, you know, 15 years. But I also was here when Leave No Child Behind came, and we thought at that point it was way too narrow and had real concerns about just looking at these two areas, and we were kind of told by feds and whatnot, don't worry about it, it'll all come together. You know, the soft skills are key. We've heard that for a long time. You know, the struggle I've always had with our tech ed program, we've got a great program, but sometimes the biggest hurdle are parents who think if their child goes to a tech ed school, they're a failure. They want them to go to a four-year. So, you know, we have to overcome that. And I see this as you know, some great things, but, you know, we're going to hold the educational community accountable. How do we hold the business community and our general community accountable too? We've got to figure out a way to do that. Because again, an example, you know, one of our high schools does a senior project every year, and I got to sit in and hear those presentations for several of those kids. One of those kids went to about 10 different companies to get an internship, and got turned down 9 times, and finally a very small business helped him and got him set up, and it was a great experience for him. But I was really disappointed that that was the business community response, you know, for that kind of thing. And it does take time and attention. I understand that. So I guess we need to figure out a way to, you know, to hold the whole community accountable to this, because again, we don't need to just lay this on our educators as the only ones to be responsible in the long run. If we do, you know, the educators will do the best job they can, but it's going to be difficult to meet expectations.
Thank you, and I think that's what the state board believes too, is that this has to be a Kansas movement. It can't just be an education. It really has to be, do we agree this is where we're going to go? And know this, if we go in some direction in this broad sense, we're going to have to adjust as we go. There'll be some unintended consequences. You know, no one, if you said, do we want every kid to be able to read and do math? Sure. It's just when we standardized it and made that the only thing that became. So we're going to have to adjust. This is you know, long range. How do we get to where we want to be for the long range? And it has to be where Kansas, not just educators, not just business, but how do we, you know, not just legislators, not just whoever. How do we go together? Thank you very much. Mike.
One of the questions that comes to my mind is we've talked about, you know, educational things are easy for us to do, and the new things are the internships, the outside of the classroom type things that we're normally doing. One of the questions that I would have is, how are we going to hold the students' feet to the fire and make them responsible? Like an internship, I've tried to do internships and they don't show up to work. You know, how do we have them put their skin in the game to help us help them?
Yeah, I think that, and there's 100 other challenges we have in front of us. You know, that's all those social emotional skills that, if you're talking about an internship and they're not showing up in high school, we have to start developing those skills earlier. For many of us in the room, that was instilled by our parents or grandparents. This is just what you did. You know, when you see the story of Jordy Nelson, who's making whatever he's making, $12 million a year, going back to the farm at Raleigh County, there's a work ethic that he just has with his family to go do that. And you're saying we got some kids that don't have that, right? Where we're trying to give them opportunities and they don't have that. Or we've got parents that buck the system. Yes, that's why it can't just be us. And this won't happen tomorrow. This is a long range of where we need to go if we go that way. So I don't have the magic answer to that, Mike, but I think certainly it's going to be true that some kids won't take advantage of that opportunity. And, right now we've got kids that miss 25, 30, 40 days of school and parents that support that. And then we have business saying, if you're not here, I'm not putting up with you. We just have to help them with that message. I think for a long time we said the message after World War II, go get you a college education. And now we're saying go get something post-secondary, and that will not change tomorrow in the culture that we built. So I think Mike, I think what we have to agree is, are we going to go there? And if so, then how are the real detailed, gritty, hard work that it's going to take to get there?
I was just going to add, to me, being was there and all that, and I get the question. I actually get more calls from parents at the State Department than I did when I was a superintendent, because they all think that they call us, we can tell you what to do. And that's local. But that parent that says, well, why does my kid have to be there if they can still get a B? Well, because Kansans said attendance is just as equally important as and we didn't have those. Yeah, that's right, Well, then I might want to look at the rigor of my curriculum if they can get a B without showing up. So just some of the value, but Randy's right. That's the work we have to move forward.
But this is trying to move us forward as a state. And your input is very, very important. So thank you for taking time to be here. You have a million things you could be doing, but you decided to spend the last 90 minutes with us. So thank you. Have a great rest of the day.